Our victim advocacy partners will also present to you their missions and successes in this horrible world of anti-modern day slavery. With that, I'm going to introduce the Chief of Police for his remarks, Chief Michael Moore.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank all the members of the media for being here today and bringing attention to this critical issue before us. I also want to thank all of our partners, both our law enforcement partners as well as our victim advocates and those services that are meant to help these survivors of this most horrific aspect of human trafficking, sex trafficking here in America. As Chief Pitcher indicated, this department has partnered with the Sheriff's Department as well as 82 additional law enforcement agencies throughout Northern and Southern California. This task force has conducted over the last 7 days high-impact operations aimed at the recovery of human trafficking victims, as well as the apprehension of their exploiters. The 7-day initiative is called, as you see on these charts, Operation Reclaim and Rebuild. It resulted in the arrest of both individuals involved in buying or sex buyers, as well as exploiters, those that are trafficking with these victims. Many victims were also rescued from their exploiters. The victims' ages in this operation were found to be between 13 and 52 years of age, with 6 of them being juveniles. The average age of most victims was in their mid-20s, and our investigators worked diligently alongside our victim advocacy groups and provided these victims with services and resources to help them escape from this life-threatening environment. These operations were also supported by specially trained Department of Children and Family Services social workers from their multi-agency response team known as MART. In addition, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation for the assistance and support by Zoe, and you'll hear from them later. These operations were conducted in 9 separate counties, not just in Los Angeles County, but also Orange County, San Bernardino, Tulare, Contra Costa County. The value of these operations was that the impact was not just here locally, but across the state. I want to thank those law enforcement agencies as well as the investigators that participated and the prosecutors. Investigators who participated in the Operation Reclaim, Rebuild focused their mission on areas of town and regions such as major street boulevards, motels that were plagued with prostitution, gangs, and narcotic activity. This operation resulted in the arrest of 116 individuals by LAPD investigators alone, and a total of 368 arrested by all the involved agencies. Of the 131 victims that were rescued statewide, as I said earlier, 6 were juveniles, and 3 of those juveniles were actually rescued by LAPD investigators during their various operations. When we looked at these operations and asking for more details, what does that actually mean? We conducted both in-call and out-call operations, meaning that we would respond to advertisers, marketers of sex trade, and would go to those locations, typically known as an in-call, and then out-call advertisers that would go to the sex buyer's location. Additionally, we went to massage parlors operations that were suspected of being engaged in the sex trade. We also had street enforcement operations, and in this, we made arrests of pimps and panderers. That number was 6. In regards to those that were engaged in buying sex or sex buyer arrests, there were 37. I'm proud of the men and women of this department. Their tireless work on these last 7 days to rescue innocent victims from their exploiters. This task force, we don't take it lightly. Our participation is also to encourage other agencies across the state to join in this effort. We know that the sex trade is a prolific one that exists throughout the state and throughout our nation. It's an ugly scar against this great country that exists too oftentimes in plain sight. And our work in uniting victims to services and also working with the full spectrum of agencies, both enforcement but as well as victim advocates and rescuers, is meant to end this terrible scourge on our society. Thank you, and I'll return this back to Chief Pitcher.
Thank you, Chief. And at this point in time, I'm going to call upon Commander Michael Hanneman of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. He is in charge of the Detective Bureau and was involved in the operation, for his comments.
Thank you, Chris. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, in partnership with the Los Angeles Police Department, federal, state, county, and local law enforcement, along with social service agencies and victim service providers, make up what we know as the LA Regional Human Trafficking Task Force. This task force is like no other. It combines one mission under one roof to support the investigative strategies of the federal, state, county, and local law enforcement from a multitude of policing agencies across California. Under the leadership and experience of the largest sheriff's department with the prosecutorial authority of the United States Attorney's Office, the California State Attorney General's Office, and the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. The task force brings together systems and disciplines with the victim's needs always at the core of what we do. Our valued partnership with our advocates, Saving Innocence, Zoe International, and other non-government organizations, while working closely with our county social services agencies, allows us to address the needs of our victims while aggressively pursuing justice to the fullest extent of the law against those individuals and groups responsible for their victimization. Now, Chief Moore has already went over some of the stats, but let me give you the overall stats for the week-long operation. For the 2023 Operation Reclaim Rebuild, we yielded significant results. There were 125 adults rescued. There were 6 sexually exploited children rescued. There were 38 suspected sex traffickers and exploiters arrested. And there were 197 sex buyers arrested. In total, there were 368 criminal arrests made during this week-long operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander. And I'm going to take the opportunity now to share with you a couple of the stories of the agencies that had participated in this task force and what they did during the operations. Investigators from the Contra Costa District Attorney's Office Safe Streets Task Force Human Trafficking Task Force conducted several proactive operations targeting the arrests of identified and wanted pimps. The operations were very successful with the arrest of 4 pimps throughout the Bay Area. One of those pimps was in possession of a Glock handgun. That handgun had been outfitted with a full auto switch, rendering it a fully automatic pistol. These operations were executed by the following agencies: Pittsburgh PD in Northern California, Brentwood PD, CHP, San Pablo PD, Probation, Richmond PD, the Contra Costa DA's office, the California Department of Corrections, and the Walnut Creek Police Department. In another case, detectives assigned to the Investigative Services Division of the Vacaville Police Department conducted an operation to target sex buyers. Their operation uncovered the activities of a violent and aggressive suspect. That suspect was identified as an active college basketball coach. The online sex buyer reviews stated he possibly sexually assaulted sex workers in the past and tended to often be aggressive with the sex workers. It appeared that his behavior was routine, and several possible victims tried to warn the other workers about him via the online reviews. The detectives targeted this individual and were able to arrest the suspect on prostitution-related charges during the operation, thus taking an aggressive and violent buyer off the streets and protecting the victims. In another case, LAPD Southeast Division and Southwest Division vice officers were conducting a human trafficking task force on the Figueroa corridor between Imperial Highway and Manchester Boulevard. Officers were working in an undercover capacity to attempt to identify sex workers and traffickers involved in criminal activities. They contacted a female sex worker, later identified as the victim, who solicited an undercover officer. During the investigation, the victim and her trafficker were detained. The victim disclosed to the officers the trafficker took all her money after she worked on the corridor every day as a sex worker. The victim was in fear for her life. The suspect was arrested for a felony pimping charge, and officers supported that victim by diligently reuniting that victim with her 10-year-old son back in the state of Texas, in addition to getting her the valuable services that she needed to reclaim her life. I'm going to talk a little bit about the notable convictions, what happens after the operations. And I want to highlight the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office that works with the department to prosecute these crimes that we have and bring them to justice. In the one incident from last year in 2022, as it wound its way through the courts, LAPD investigators determined that a suspect had romanced a victim and ultimately convinced her to engage in commercial sex work. The suspect controlled all of the victim's finances and prevented her from seeing her family and her children. If the victim did not follow his instructions, the defendant would then physically beat her. Ultimately, the victim gained the courage to report to the suspect's parole agent that he was physically abusing her and forcing her into sex work. That suspect was ultimately arrested, and he pled to the following charges. He pled to human trafficking, pimping a victim over the age of 18, and assault by means likely to cause great bodily injury. The prosecution provided by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office Sex Crimes Unit led to a sentence of 10 years and 4 months in state prison for this suspect. In another instance, an LAPD investigation led to the recovery of a minor and 2 additional adult victims. The minor was 16 years old at the time of the subject offense. The initial investigation produced a small amount of evidence against that suspect. However, the investigators were not deterred, and they continued to actively work the case. That suspect was arrested a second time, during which an undercover operation was conducted by LAPD officers, producing further evidence for a successful prosecution. That suspect was ultimately arrested, and he pled to human trafficking and pimping charges and received a sentence of 12 years in state prison for his crimes. Vernon Police Department initiated a stolen vehicle investigation, at which time the suspect and 2 female minors were detained. LAPD investigators responded to the investigation and initiated their own human trafficking investigation, which revealed that the defendant had trafficked the 3 minors. The minors were originally from the San Diego area, and the suspects trafficked them to Los Angeles to engage them in commercial sex work. Several months later, during an undercover operation with that suspect, officers observed the same suspect attempt to pander a female adult sex worker and then attempt to physically kidnap a second female adult sex worker at 66th Street and Denver Avenue. The suspect was arrested, and he ultimately pled to the following charges: 3 counts of human trafficking of a minor, 2 counts of attempted human trafficking of an adult, and 1 count of attempted kidnap. For his crimes and a very successful prosecution by the LA County DA's Sex Crimes Unit, he received a sentence of 36 years in state prison for his crimes. And then finally, LAPD officers determined a 36-year-old suspect, a third striker on parole, for a 2017 conviction for human trafficking of an 11-year-old girl, had resumed his trafficking enterprise immediately upon being released from prison. The suspect encountered another 14-year-old girl on the Figueroa Blade and recruited her to work for him. The suspect then sexually assaulted that victim on several occasions in his vehicle. He drove her to the Blade to show her the girls that he had working for him. The suspect repeatedly asked the victim to work for him, but she refused. The suspect drove that unresisting victim straight to Holt Boulevard in the city of Pomona, put her on the boulevard to work for him as a sex worker. That suspect was later arrested and ultimately pled to the following charges. A jury convicted that defendant of the following charges: kidnapping, human trafficking of a minor by force and fear, and also several lewd acts of a child under the age of 15. That suspect received a life sentence in prison. We want to thank all of our partners in this effort, and ultimately, once again, the LA County District Attorney's Office for their successful working with the entities within Los Angeles Police Department and the other law enforcement agencies to successfully prosecute these cases and take these individuals off the streets that continue to go after these victims and engage them in commercial sex work. One of the other entities I want to bring up is, and I'll introduce him now for his comments, is what happens to the victims, what services they received, how they are treated and rescued from this work of commercial sex work. I'm going to bring up at this time the head of Zoe International, Mr. Dave Cox.
Well, thank you so much, Chief. It's very humbling to stand here behind me. These are all champions within our city and the organizations that they represent. I want to say a specific thank you to Chief Moore, to Chief Pitcher, Commander Henneman. Your departments dedicate a lot of resources. It does not go unnoticed. It's not common that cities put this much effort behind it, and you're really an example to police departments nationwide. I want to say also to the frontline human trafficking and vice officers and federal agents, you have encouraged and supported a collaborative approach as well, and you are saving lives literally. So we just want you to know that we see you, we support you, and we are with you. To our city leaders, LA City Council, Board of Supervisors, DCFS, Probation, you've encouraged and supported a collaborative approach. You're really creating a model for cities to follow, so we want to say thank you for being difference makers. My name is David Cox. I serve as the COO for Zoe International, and we've been combating child sex trafficking for 20 years internationally and 10 years locally. I'm also representing two other great organizations, NGOs, that are in this work. To my right here, this is Alan Smith. He's with Saving Innocence. They have pioneered work combating sex trafficking in Los Angeles. To my left is Nayeli May with Journey Out. And she's been a champion, as well as that whole organization, for years, helping adult victims on their journey out of exploitation and abuse. Today, I want to share briefly why we're here, what happens to victims once they're recovered, and what can we do. Why we're here. Simply, we're here because no person should be owned, bought, or sold. We're here because there is no such thing as a child prostitute. 12-year-old girls selling themselves on the street or online cannot give consent. That's called rape. In our city, kids are being raped 20 to 30 times a day. At Zoe International and Saving Innocence, we cared for 489 youth victims of sex trafficking in LA this past year alone. Those are just the kids we've identified. We cared for kids as young as 11 years old last year. This isn't just happening to youth. It's happening to adults through force, through fraud, through coercion. We're even seeing victims and traffickers and sex buyers coming from out of state, out of the country, to Los Angeles. It's happening in hotels you've stayed in. It happens on the streets you drive on. It's estimated that there's approximately 49.6 million people trafficked worldwide. How can this be happening? Traffickers are master predators. They're on the hunt for vulnerable kids and adults. For those who may say this crime is not serious and it's not violent, let me just share the violence that our frontline teams see daily. Some of our youth and adults, they've been pistol whipped. Some have jumped out of moving vehicles just to escape. Some have been chased down and beaten. I myself saw a 14-year-old, she looked about 14, running for her life down the streets of LA from traffickers. Some have had their homes shot at by traffickers. I know at Zoe we have helped relocate families and the victim child for their own safety. Some are missing and some are killed. Escaping what's commonly referred to as the life, it's not just difficult, it can be life-threatening. What happens when a victim is recovered? You know, we give these victims ongoing help and support that they need. And for child victims, Zoe, as well as Saving Innocence, we provide advocacy services. Once we're notified that law enforcement's recovered a child, we will have an advocate on site anywhere in LA City or LA County within 90 minutes. Those advocates are heroes. They become mentors, they help kids connect to services, and they help them achieve their goals. Not all kids have a safe home to go to, though. In 2021, Zoe opened a specialized home for youth survivors of sex trafficking on a beautiful 50-acre campus in LA County. For adult victims of human trafficking, Journey Out is contacted. I know our team contacted them 3 times this past week. Journey Out cared for 256 adult clients last year, and they do outreaches to hundreds of individuals where known open blatant prostitution is occurring. They do amazing work. Some ask if we're discouraged in this work. Honestly, the answer is no. And I think the reason is because we're seeing too many successes from the efforts involved. We're seeing lives changed. What we're seeing and finding, youth who have been trafficked, who were not even in school, they're graduating high school now. What we're finding is youth and adults who had no other job, they now are finding jobs and getting established. We're seeing victims who used to go from day-to-day survival, now they're dreaming about their future. One youth thanked Zoe with tears in her eyes, and she said, "You guys saved my life." Another 17-year-old youth said to a Saving Innocence advocate, "You gave me a second chance at life." There was an adult survivor who said, "Because of Journey Out, I get to start my life over." Their lives were changed. These are all encouraging success stories, but there's still victims out there that need our help. So what can we do? We can rise up as a community. We can speak up on the issue of human trafficking, and we can stand up for the kids in our lives. The bottom line is, if a kid feels like there isn't anybody in their life, there's a trafficker lying in wait to become their somebody. I want to close with a quote from Edmund Burke. He said, "The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing." The people standing behind me here, they're doing something. Law enforcement can't solve this problem alone. So we stand with them and we say, this is our city, it's our fight, and we will continue this fight until every person is reached and human trafficking is ended. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I want to take the opportunity to acknowledge LAPD Detective Mario Gallegos, who coordinates the efforts of the Human Trafficking Task Force throughout the department and also helped coordinate Operation Reclaim and Rebuild. He will be available for your specific questions related to the task force operations. Additionally, we have Assistant Chief Al Labrada, who is the Director of the Office of Special Operations behind me, will be available to provide a statement in Spanish if you have any requests there. At this point in time, we are going to open it up for questions for myself or anybody behind me for all of the agencies.
Good morning. I need some clarification, whether it comes from you or Commander Hanneman. On the 368 arrests, how many agencies were involved in those arrests? 82, right?
It was 82.
82.
82.
That's Operation Reclaim and Rebuild.
Okay, so it was 82 agencies. In 1 week, that was 368 arrests.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Now, for comparison or for context, 368 arrests total, is that pretty significant in the big picture? Or have you had others where you've had more arrests or fewer arrests?
I'm going to have to call up Detective Gallegos to give you the context, but that's significant in terms of an operation that looks at this type of crime.
And then of those 368 arrests, how many of them were in this region, in LA County?
Do you have that? Well, I'm gonna have to break that down. It's in a spreadsheet. We'll talk later, Steve. Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. And then of the buyers, the 197 buyers that were arrested, can you give us a sense of their ages, their backgrounds? I mean, is there a pattern of buyer here, or is it all over the map?
It's all over the map. Different ages, different ethnicities, different backgrounds.
Socioeconomic?
It varies. It's all over.
Thanks, sir.
You're welcome.
I was looking for some context as well. You say this started back in 2014. Chief, can you give us kind of a bigger picture view here? What has changed? What's kind of the push right now?
Well, the purpose of today is to draw awareness to this, that this is happening across all of our communities, that there's a collective effort both with our federal, state, and local prosecutors, as well as our federal, state, and local law enforcement. And the critical aspect of this is Zoe and Journey Out and the care providers for the victims of these traffickers. The human slavery that's existing here is that we work hand in hand. The difference is years ago, we would look at all of these from an enforcement posture. And that would be both to arrest those that are individuals that are going out and preying upon these victims. And we would look at those sex workers as in a criminal manner. And today our effort is to look at them as what they are, which is victims. They're being exploited, sometimes by force, by threat of death, other times by coercion of threats of violence against their family, by kidnapping them and taking them out of the environment and isolating them away from any other form of support. They become dependent on that exploiter. And so with this collective effort, though, this is a trade that has gone on and continues to go on, fueled by simple greed and lust and criminal acts of individuals that walk amongst us. They come from every social economic background. They're businessmen, they're doctors, they're teachers, they're professionals, they're laborers. They come from every walk. And they engage in this, whether it be in a commercial establishment or be an out call or in call, or it's on your street in your neighborhood. And as a society, we need to ensure that we hold them accountable and take actions to deter them so there's consequences. And so what's changed over the time is that not enough. But we're not going to give up. We're encouraged by the accounts that we've heard today from a prosecution that traffickers are being held, and that the word of warning to others who believe and look at the attraction of the money that can be made. And make no mistake about it, tens of thousands of dollars can be made in this profession, which is what draws individuals to believe that they can find this as a lucrative business, and that they can essentially take ownership of another human being and exploit and sell that individual without consequence. And we're here to say quite differently. Secondly, is that to the victims, to the survivors of this, is that there's resources available to them. Not just resources in the sense of housing or in counseling services, but housing and other means of getting them out of this death spiral. Because this is not a trade or profession that has any exit strategy typically other than the loss of life.
One more question. This is unrelated. Comment, please. There was a deadly pursuit yesterday where 2 people were killed, and this was in Panorama City. Comment on that?
I'll briefly comment that I was made aware of that. I know that our investigation has occurred overnight. I'll get a briefing later today. We take this circumstance very seriously. The officers were called, as my understanding, to an investigation of a vehicle being stolen. And upon their arrival, individuals we believe responsible for that fled. Officers initiated a pursuit. It's unclear to me whether or not they went into a tracking mode or if they had lost sight of the individual. But sadly and tragically, 2 individuals, one the driver who we later found to be wanted for a no bail felony warrant, callously drove into an intersection at a high speed and T-boned 2 innocent motorists in a vehicle, killing both of them. The driver then attempted to flee, and our officers were able to capture and arrest him. And our investigation, and he's being charged with murder in regards to this matter. And we'll work with the district attorney's office on the further details of this case, and to the public that looks to the circumstances of why the department was pursuing that individual. Was it consistent with our policies and expectations? We will have more information on that as the information becomes known. Thank you.
Back on topic then, Chief Pitcher, the pimps that you were talking about, were they all part of a bigger network? Are they all individual organizations? Can you give us a perspective?
The individual pimps, they're more individual. They're not an organized nature. They operate independently of one another.
Thank you.
So in closing, although Operation Reclaim and Rebuild happens only once a year, the Los Angeles Police Department has human trafficking task forces in each of its 4 geographic bureaus that operates 365 days a year. And I know the same is true for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. So although you see what you heard and have seen today is in relation to Operation Reclaim and Rebuild, this is an enforcement and reclamation effort that happens literally week in and week out all throughout the year. So I want to thank the partner agencies behind me for all of the efforts that they put in, not only to Operation Reclaim and Rebuild, but every day to combat human trafficking. So if there are no more questions, or if you want to get us offline, you are more than welcome. Thank you very much for attending the press conference.